Hi, James and Julian here from Adventure Bike Rider, and welcome to this review of the new for 2021 KTM Super Adventure S. Julian.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about the launch, because usually bike launches, you'll be jetting off somewhere in the sunshine, Spain, the Canary Islands, something like that.
That would be the case.
We all know that, travel's been a little bit limited of late. So where were you and what was going on?
Well, I mean, it's hard to imagine we're still here a year on, because this time last year we didn't go on the 390 launch to the Canary Islands. This time round for the 1290, a similar launch had been planned in Lanzarote, and with the travel information was there. We were going to go on, things were opening up, and nothing changed. So basically, we're back to the UK. UK launches are the way forward at the moment. So rather than the sun and the volcanic landscapes of Canary Islands, we had Silverstone, where KTM headquarters are. So
and that's a pretty iconic location for a launch of a bike. You know,
well,
one of the world's leading. We weren't actually on the racetrack, were we? But you know, it's not a bad place to start.
It's alongside it, and we could hear cars or bikes belting around the circuit behind us. But the KTM building is far enough away from it. You can know you're round about there, but it's not on the side of the racetrack. But you know, it was a sunny day in March, which was fairly rare. And bear in mind, sort of, you know, we were only just coming out of the spring. It was nice to see the sun peeping its out. By the afternoon, it was fully sunny. It was hot. It was actually hot.
Jealous as hell. I was sat here in the ABR offices, which is a wonderful place to be. Don't get me wrong, but I was sat at my desk. I was editing a story about someone riding through Brazil, and the images were incredible for the upcoming issue of ABR magazine. And just you were sending me pictures and messages from the launch, and I was like, oh my god, I wish I was out on a bike right now. It must have been brilliant.
So sorry. It wasn't intended to make you jealous whatsoever, but you were sat in here when I was riding bikes in the sun. Life's hard.
In this review, we're going to look in detail at various different parts of the bike. What's new, what's not new. So to begin with, when KTM sent me through the images of the bike and told us that there was going to be a launch, I opened up on my computer excitedly, and I have to admit, I was disappointed is maybe not the word, but I was hoping to see something a little more different, because the bike looks very similar to the previous model, doesn't it?
I know, and it's difficult sometimes with manufacturers. They put loads and loads of changes there, but unless they make a fundamental change to the bodywork and the profile of the bike, you do get up with this. Suzuki did it with their motocross bikes. They made loads of changes each year to their motocross bike, but every year it looked exactly the same for about 15 years. Suzuki motocross. So
you don't know if you've got the new one. You can't show off.
and you want, if you've got a new bike, you want it to look like a new bike. And to a certain extent, if you look at the R does look quite different, but the Super Adventure S does look much the same. If you put the profile, and they did it on the screen between the two bikes, the profiles are quite different. They're definitely similar. It's the same bike, but the profile is different. It's lower. There's a change in the geometry to it. A lot of changes in it, but visually, yeah, I can quite see that you would think, well, what's changed with this bike? But go dig deeper into detail. There's a lot of change. 90% of the components of that bike are changed.
Yeah.
It's just unfortunate. It looks like 20% of
You just can't tell from the outside. So
yes.
Before we dig deeper into the bike, I think let's take a moment to talk about this 1290 Super Adventure. You mentioned an R model and an S model.
Yep.
So it was the S model that you tested, which is new for 2021. So can you explain the difference between the two for people that aren't versed in KTM model?
Well, basically, there ends up being a swap between the two, between the road-going model, which used to be just a standard one, then there'd be an R model, but now the R for the racing, which is the more off-road based, will come with the wire wheels and the more off-road focus, and the S model is the one that's more road-based. So the S model has the alloy wheels. The road going rubber is much more intended for doing long distance. It will still do the off-road stuff, absolutely so. But if you are going to plan on doing lots of off-road stuff, you really should buy the R, because it's better at that. They will both do it. You'll just need to make some changes in order to make your S model more suitable for the off-road. And if you're going to do that anyway, well, you probably should have bought the R. I have to say, between the two, the R does look the more sexy.
It looks really cool, doesn't it?
In fact, when the first one came out in 2013, the first one came out, you could actually buy the standard bikes, the road going model, but you could buy the plastics for the R. So you had all the road going model, but it looked like the sexy model. And I was selling them at the time, and people said, yeah, I'll have the road going models, but I'll have the plastics off the R.
And so when we're talking about the S, are we talking about kind of a larger screen, slightly more, a few more creature comforts for long days on the road?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the one you should take if you're going to do lots of touring, and it's going to be predominantly tarmac based, and probably maybe with somebody on the back. The S model is the one to choose. 23 litre tank, all the bells and whistles that you can have. The bells and whistles will be there on the R, but they'll be more focused towards the off road side of things.
Now, you've got a little bit of a history with KTM, haven't you? Because along with your many motorcycling accomplishments and a career spanning a number of years doing various different disciplines in motorcycling, you were a brand manager at a bike dealership for KTM, weren't you?
Yeah. I was KTM brand manager in Bristol, and I was there when the 1190 came out. It was quite interesting because it was quite a quantum shift. We were at the time, this bike traced its way back to 2002 with the original 950, and that's the bike that Ewan and Charlie wanted to take on the long way down. Then
turned down, weren't they?
Well, KTM weren't ready for it, and history will show that might not be the greatest decision. Well, retrospect is a good thing, but either way, the 950 went onto the 990, and 990 is much loved bike, and you still see them around, and they are great bikes. But that was being phased out just as I was starting at Fowler's in 2012. And 2013, the one came in, and in a way, it was KTM's response to just how big the GS was getting. So it parked the Dakar heritage in terms of the styling back with the 990, and went for an altogether different look to the thing. Angular designs, bigger engine.
This was the 1190.
The original 1190, yeah. And in a way, they went a little bit early with that one because the tech they wanted to put on it actually came a year later. The motion traction control, the Bosch gyroscopic units were an add-on if you'd already bought the bike. I think they wanted to get it out. It wasn't quite ready, so it came a year later. So I was selling those bikes when they originally came out. That bike went on. There was an upgrade. Then the first Super Adventure S came out in 2015, and to be honest, it looked a bit of a big beast. They made the mistake of making it all white plastics, and there was so lot of plastic. It looked like there was a small fridge in front of the rider. So if you go back to look at the original 2015, it does look a big old liner of a bike. But the last upgrade of the Super Adventure was 2017. So in a way, 4 years on, the upgrade that we rode was well overdue in a way.
Yeah. So you're at the launch. You've had a presentation. Yeah. You've been given the keys to a bike, and you swing your leg over the 1290 Super Adventure S for the first time. What are you thinking?
Well, first of all, you say I've got the keys. It's keyless technology. So
you don't have the keys.
They're not a physical key. It's a key fob. So this time you just get the key fob and you pop it away in your pocket. You don't need to touch it.
Was there anyone looking for recognition among the journalists?
Well, actually, it must be said this is a proper keyless because we don't pull the key out. With the Ducati we tested recently, you still needed the key to open up the tank and open up the seat. With the KTM, you keep it in your pocket. As long as it's within distance, everything works. You don't need to open it up. So you can refuel and stuff like that. So you Sitting on the bike, it's classic feel of the KTM. In terms of the actual how the 1290 feels, it doesn't feel much different to the 1190. And KTMs always have nice open cockpits, quite wide motocrossy style bars, which is good. So the layout is quite familiar. But what's not familiar is the big TFT screen. They've gone the biggest on the market at the moment. So it's almost like an iPad. You've got an iPad in front of you.
Is it this big?
7.5 inch. It is a really big screen.
It's a whopper.
And they're filling the whole screen there. But it's strange. In this one, particularly, they've realised how much you can do with TFT. I think in the past, certainly on the 790 and the 890, there's a TFT screen, but they almost just use two colours and almost ignore its capabilities. This time, somebody said, we can do colours on this. And it's like, can we? All right. So all of a sudden, it's hyper colourful. And it's really, they've made... in terms of the displays, they tried to make it very intuitive. So what comes up on the screen is the bit you're adjusting. So if you're adjusting the preload and raising the preload, as you rack through and raise the preload, a picture of the bike actually goes up and you see the back going up. So if you are adjusting things on the suspension, you see the bit of the bike that's actually which is good. If you're adjusting anti-dive, which you can do on the anti-dive, a picture will come up to illustrate that picture. If you want to pair your phone, a picture of the phone will turn up. So a lot of the manufacturers are striving to get intuitive with their displays, and KTM has done well. And also, to go with that, there's new switchgear, and it's good switchgear. You know, we've covered other competitors who have maybe overcomplicated the issue in terms of the amount of buttons they've got. Mentioning no names, Honda. However,
that Africa Twin bar, I was lucky enough to have an Africa Twin long-term bike, new for 2021 this year. Yeah. I'm loving every second I'm spending on it, but I still haven't figured out what all those buttons do on the right-hand bar.
No, well, KTM have made it as good as they can, and I think it is good. It's backlit. There's a central button to pick the bits you want, and buttons left, right, and centre to move around. And then when you want to return it, there's a return button at the top. Tap it a couple of times, and you go back to the simple screen. So it's easy to move around. And on the right-hand side, you've got a couple of custom buttons, which means you can toggle across to your favourites. There isn't too much to do. There's also the cruise control, which we'll come to, but the cruise control buttons are separate, and you do the cruise control buttons with your thumb and your forefinger, but they're completely separate to the main things. They haven't tried to do too much, and they don't feel overcomplicated. So I think it's a big plus in terms of how it navigates around in terms of the screen, what the screen looks like. In terms of the displays you can have, automatic will vary according to brightness. If it goes dark, it will go to white display on black, but in the daytime it's black display on white. And if you go into rally mode, it's a completely different screen. I got into rally mode by accident. And I'm saying to Simon, the PR guy, how can I get this back? And right, okay, you're in rally mode. But thumbs up. It's a big old display. But it's nice and clear, and in normal riding mode, you've got the tacho around the outside, you've got the gear up in the top corner, and you've got your speed, nice and clear, and it's easy to move around when you are moving. You don't need to do too much, but it's easy to, if you want to swap riding modes, for instance, when you're riding, easy to click into riding mode, choose the one you want, make sure your throttle's shut, and you can do it on the fly.
On the fly, you don't have to stop, you don't have to
no
turn
problem
it
at
off,
all.
change gear, spin around 3 times to change your
Absolutely
riding mode.
not. It just says close throttle. You roll it forward, and you're in the next mode. So it's a nice place to be sat on it. It's lower. It's definitely lower than previously, and I think that's probably a response to the fact that they want to make it available to riders of all sizes, and who knows, a woman might buy one of their bikes.
Well, it's one of the things, isn't it? And we get it a lot from readers of ABR magazine, in that if you are a bit shorter, the bigger venture bikes just can be, sometimes intimidating. Sometimes just a pain in the ass because they're so tall. Yeah. So how tall are you, Julian?
I think I'm 5'11" and a bit.
So how did you fare?
I do wish I was 6 foot, but I'm 5'11".
So how did you fare? Were the feet firmly on the ground? Yeah. Did you have leg bend? Was it
firmly on the ground to the extent I wanted the seat to be a little bit higher?
Oh, okay.
But it's certainly very comfortable. And certainly if you're going to take it off road and you weren't used to it, you'd be quite pleased with that being a little bit lower, because sometimes that can make a bit. Of course, the slight thing is if it is a lower seat, and I found when we on the tiny bit of off road we did, the transition from seated to standing is harder if you are sat lower.
Is it those creaking knees? Is that
well, it's just physically going. I was riding my EXC at the weekend, and because it's higher and your legs are stretched out more, standing is an awful lot easier than on the bike. But bear in mind, the people who are, this is basically a road going bike, so that the seat height, it's easier to get on. You don't kick the back quite so much when you're getting onto it, and sitting there, it's nice and comfortable. It doesn't feel wide. The tank is physically wide as they all are. Yeah. But they've managed to make it lower.
Does it feel imposing? Because some bikes you get on, like I got on the Tiger 850 Sport the other day. That's lovely. A smaller bike, smaller engine, but I got on that, and everything just so unimposing. You just throw your leg over it. It feels small, even though it's a mid-sized bike, and it's great. Whereas I jumped from that onto the Africa Twin, and suddenly the Africa Twin felt quite a big imposing bike again with a tank quite high. What's that feeling of when you get on it?
Well, they've worked on it, and it's part of the thing that happens with the whole design with KTM. They've done it with the 790 and 890. They're working out mass centralisation. That's to try and get the engine more compact, but also to make the fuel tank smaller. So for this one, they've followed the same tech as they have for 790 and 890, which to change the tank from a central tank in the centre to a 3-cell tank and take the fuel load down to the sides. Now you can't notice it as much.
It hasn't got the saddlebags as the 790 or 890.
They are there. They're just behind the fairing, so you don't notice them there. But there's a smaller tank at the top, and then the fuel load is downside. So that has physically taken how imposing the bike is down. It's physically made the bike be able to be lower. But also in that, there's a new subframe. There's an aluminium subframe. It's not a trellis subframe. So the main frame is still trellis, but it's an aluminium subframe. But the frame itself is physically shorter to bring the headstock in and make it a little bit more lively. But to counter that, the swinging arm is a little bit longer. So in terms of the handling, they've done that thing of making sure all the weight is centered around that center of gravity in the middle of the bike. But it's also being lower and more centered around that, and that helps the stability. And it's really noticeable on the 790. You notice on the 890 even more, because they continued that thing. And what they've learned from the 890, they've taken into the 1290. So the stability is aided by what they're doing with the frame, which is squeezing it all into a smaller space, getting all that weight in together, and centered and slightly towards the front. So it's, all the changes they're making are making the bikes better, but they're also making them accessible because they are a little bit lower, a little bit shorter, and certainly not imposing. And moving the bike around, it doesn't feel like a big old lump. It's 220 kilos, so it's still a 220 dry. So you put 23 litres of fuel on, we've got another 20 kilos in there. But just moving it around, it does feel nice and light to move around. You don't think, I can't push this thing around. So it wears that weight well.
Because for me, I'm regular viewers of the Adventure Bike Rider podcast, the ABR Garage, will probably know that for me, the 790 Adventure was a huge hit last year. I absolutely adored it. And one of the things I loved was the weight being so low down. Those saddlebag fuel tanks don't look great, but in terms of handling and balance, it was, I don't think it's wrong to say it was a bit of a revelation to me. Is it a similar experience on the 1290?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that people will get an impression of things, or how can that possibly work, or that they'll break in a crash and all things like that. Well, clearly KTM have checked that these fuel tanks aren't going to break in a crash. They are pretty sturdy, aren't they? Pretty damn sturdy tanks. But the difference it makes is quite huge of just bringing that weight down. If you think of a 23 litre tank, it's 23 kilos. If you put that balance on the top of the bike, inevitably that bike is going to be top heavy. Yeah. There's no way around it. So if you can take 5 litres there and then the rest of it all the way down the side, it's inevitably going to make things better. So that's what they've done, and they're the only manufacturer heading in that direction. And it's noticeable that KTM bikes, in terms of their stability and how planted they feel, they don't feel like other bikes, and that's good, because they are really, really stable. I don't know whether you've ridden the 890 yet, but the 890,
I haven't had the chance to ride the 890 yet.
The 890 takes what they've done with the 790 and on again, and the 890 the tech from the 890 is transferred onto the 1290, and those improvements are brung with it. In a way, KTM have focused on their little bikes a little bit too much in the intervening 4 years. I mean, if you think all the launches we've done the 390, we've done the 790 and 890. So 4 years of technology on their little bikes, they say, okay, well, we're learning quite a lot. Let's put it on a big bike. So that's, in a way, it's catching their premier class bike up to the little ones who've been having all the attention.
Yeah, and what was that? Well, we may as well talk about handling now, because we're talking about balance and centre of gravity and things like that. So how did she handle when you got out onto the country lanes and gave us some welly?
It feels really good. It is always with the bigger adventure bikes, you might look at them and think they're going to be big old tanks. And sure, back in the day, they perhaps used to be like that. But people have realised you don't want these bikes to be unwieldy. They are a little bit taller, and certainly if you're running 18 and 21 tyres, inevitably they sit a little bit higher. But this is running road dimensions on the tyre, and it is really lively. 19 and 17. So it's not much difference you'd have on any conventional naked bike or like that. And it does handle like that. Yes, it's a really nice ride. riding position,
Nice and
nice and wide,
adventure stance,
nice and wide, but not unnecessary. So you don't feel you're towering over the top of it. With the new seat height, it takes you down into the bike a little. So if you're minded to, if you're one of those guys that likes scratching around the twisties and seeing how low you can get around the corner, you can certainly do it. If you ride like the majority of adventure bike riders and just enjoy the ride, enjoy the ride and the fact you're on a bike, you can just drift it on, and it's beautifully balanced. Between the balance between back and front is just right. And it's a joy to ride. Whether on the fast road, it can certainly power on. And we haven't really mentioned the motor. It's that big LC8 motor. It is a hell of a motor, 160 bhp there, and all the torque you could possibly want. So it is. If you open that bike up, man, you've got a big V12 underneath you.
Yeah.
And in a way, KTM are keeping with that. It's interesting to note how the manufacturers of the premier class bikes are almost moving into their own corners in terms of engine configuration.
Yeah.
Ducati have now gone for their V4, so they've turned their back on the V twin, and said we're going in a different direction. Honda have obviously got the parallel twin. BMW have got the Boxer. So in a way, KTM have got sort of a free rein for their being the manufacturer of the big V twin, and obviously Triumph have got the triple. So they've all, rather than trying to sort of meet in the middle, they're all kind of seen almost like they're specialising in their own type of engine, and KTM, with their LC8 engine, it's a fantastic engine. They haven't done that much to it.
It's been knocking around for a few years now, hasn't it?
Yeah.
What did it sound like when you started it up for the first time?
I have to say, I wish we'd had the Acro on it. Normally, when they provide you with the bike, they've already
You're spoiled, Julian. You're spoiled.
They've already pimped it with an Acro on the back, and all my road bikes have had different end cans on. It's what you do with a bike, and you buy it and then change the end can. So an Acro is the way forward on there. But it's a good rasp to it but it is relatively quiet on there. It's Euro 5 compliant, so it can't roar from the factory as it is. It's got a new exhaust system, new lambda sensors, like anybody cares about lambda sensors, and a new stainless steel silencer on the back. So at a tick over, it's relatively muted, but take it out on the road and open it up. But if you are in sport mode, it just absolutely surges.
Big KTM bikes, they've got a reputation of being absolute hooligans. I'm assuming this continues that trend.
Oh, absolutely. They've taken some of the technology for things like that, for something like that. Their 1290 Beast and those big engines, and I know from back in the day, the now discontinued RC8. If you've ever ridden an RC8, that's just an absolutely ridiculous bike. If you ever get a chance to ride it, do so. But you'll come off sort of almost shaking with the amount of adrenaline in your system. It's what KTM, their USP within the market of having that big, powerful engine. They haven't lost that. They haven't lost sight of the fact that why people bought those KTMs was just the power that's in them, more so than any other bike out there. Honda aren't even trying to compete in terms of power. They know they can't do that with the Africa Twin, so they've gone in a different direction. But if you want a powerful adventure bike, your KTM one that's going to deliver.
Okay, so at this stage, Julian, we need to take a little break and talk about something a lot more interesting than motorbikes.
What's that, James?
We need to talk about T-shirts. That's it. You may see that we're modelling Adventure Bike Rider T-shirts, which you can buy if you want to show the world that you are an adventure biker, both on and off the bike. We've got this wonderful limited edition version. We've got the classic T-shirt, and behind me, we have our Adventurous Mountain T-shirt. If you'd like to take a look at the full range and get yourself an ABR T-shirt, just head over to www.adventurebikerider.com/shop. Okay, so back to the boring subject of bikes.
Well, I recommend buying the T-shirt with me on the front from the ABR Festival. You can have a picture of me on the front of your T-shirt. What could be better?
There is a T-shirt with you on the front.
It is,
isn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My kids have got them.
Your kids got you on your T-shirt.
Yeah,
that's kind of sweet. And a little scary at the same time.
Wrong. Yeah, definitely.
For those of you who don't know, the T-shirt is a picture taken of the ABR Festival in 2019. Yep. Julian led a procession of adventure bikers up the drive of the magnificent Ragley Hall estate, and we turned that picture into a T-shirt, which you can get at www.adventurebikerider.com/shop, and you can wear Julian on your chest.
Fantastic.
Who wouldn't want to do that?
Absolutely. Notice you're not doing it.
Mate, do you make your kids wear it, or do they do it? They do it voluntarily.
They sort of was so cool.
So we talked about various aspects of the bike, but one thing we haven't spoken about, the rider modes. Now, I'm assuming there's plenty to choose from because it's a big adventure bike in 2021.
Well, yes, you have to have rider mode. You have to be able to toggle between various options. And, there's a lot of point in doing that because in terms of the engine output, but also with a bike like the KTM and many of the others, with the semi-active suspension, what changing the rider mode does, it also changes the suspension. So if you go into sport mode, not only is the power more aggressive, but the stance and the suspension is more aggressive, so it stiffens up for you. Yeah. So there are those changes as well. It's not just the power; it's changing with those models. Okay, if you've got the one, if you bought down to the more basic models, you might not have that option. But certainly when you've got with semi-active suspension, it'll make those changes. So the basic model there's an off-road mode on the S. How much you'd use it, I'm not entirely sure, but there is that one there that'll change the power and stiffen up the suspension a little bit because you will get the hit.
Slip in the back wheel as well.
It'll change the traction control as well. There's a rain mode, takes the power down to 100 bhp. It's still quite a lot to have in a rain.
Down to 100 bhp.
Yes, I know. And realistically, 100 bhp in the rain, you'd be thinking, and it still feels, you ride it on the road in rain mode, and you think I'd be quite happy with this if so there's a rain mode. There's a street mode, which is the one you're going to be using quite a lot of the time because it almost gives the best of both worlds. It's not the completely mad out sport mode, but of course the one that gives the biggest hit is the sport mode, which is the full power. It gives those options, so you can manage to do the big pull-aways if you're a man that likes wheelies. Can't do it to save my life, but those who can do wheelies will be doing those. So there's a variation in both the traction control and the suspension and the power mode that goes with it. The only one you don't get on the standard bike unless you play for that upgrade is the rally mode. And realistically, to buy the rally mode on the S would be a little bit strange because it's more of an option that perhaps is more appropriate to the R because it allows you to hang the bike out like your crisp, but
slide
you go like you're off-road hero. No, there aren't many of us that can do those heroics on big adventure bikes. So the idea of buying the road going version and putting the rally mode in, it might be something you want, and if that's KTM will sell it to you, but it's perhaps a less appropriate mode for the S and more so for the R. When we've tried it on the 790 in the rally mode, and we tried it in the desert in Morocco. Well, yes, you do need the rally mode. Yeah. On the roads around Silverstone in Northampton, not quite so rally-ish to be honest. So, but they are there and really easily selectable when you're going along. There are sometimes in terms of suspension modes as well that you can change, and in a way, if you want to stiffen up the suspension, you can put it in a sport suspension mode. Even if you're even if you're riding in street mode, because
this isn't something we touched on, is it? But you mentioned the suspension is semi-active, so that's electronic. Yeah. Is it literally pressing a button and it raises, it falls?
You can move between. You can change if you like it to be the back end to be stiffer. You can change the preload. It'll come up in stages, which is effectively the same as if you were actually racking up the preload yourself, but it's doing it electronically now. Yeah. Interestingly, this particular bike almost learns how you ride. So if you're a particularly aggressive rider who brakes heavily and just is really quite sort of on the gas all the time, the bike will begin to learn over the course of that ride how you're riding and will respond appropriately. So
that's
it will
That's so cool.
Whether it'll learn over a period of time, I don't think it's like quite intelligent like AI that'll learn. Yeah. Oh no, this is Julian riding the bike. He's not an aggressive rider, or this is someone else riding the bike. It's not becoming an intelligent ape.
Yeah.
However, for the course of the ride, it will respond to how you're riding and change the suspension appropriately. And realistically, of all the bikes that have the semi-active suspension, there are ones that don't have it. say on the Ducati, you could buy an option without the semi-active suspension, but it's touch. You spend all that money on the bike. Would you really want to have it without that? And KTM don't offer an option on the Super Adventure S without the semi-active suspension. So it's straight there from the start, and it's the way technology goes. If you still want to mess around with the suspension, well, I guess there are models out there, but the adventure market is more sophisticated now. Semi-active suspension is there to stay, and once you've got it, you will use it.
I did. I had the Ducati Multistrada 1260 Enduro, I think it was, and it had semi-active electronic suspension, and it was one of the first. It was the first bike I'd ridden with it that I had for a long period of time. Yeah. And I thought a little bit of an overkill, whatever. I found myself constantly using it because I ride a lot with my wife riding pillion. I put a load of luggage on the back an awful lot, and just having those it has little helmets. So it's like one helmet is you, two helmets you and a pillion, two helmets and luggage, and just being able to click between those and feel the bike going up and down. I used it all the time. It's one of those little luxuries that I didn't think I would use, and it became part of my everyday biking life.
And the thing is, of course, if you think back to bikes that didn't have it, did we bother to change the preload on those bikes?
Not often enough.
it would be set up when we were on it, and your partner and luggage came, and you didn't take out the
front wheel goes all light,
just all over the place. So this allows the possibility. It's really difficult for the sake of a launch. It's hard to appreciate just how many adjustments you've got. You've only got it for a short period of time, so. It would be easy to say, well, I don't see how you could ever use this because I've only got it for a matter of hours. But bearing in mind, I'm testing this bike, people are buying and owning it, then you will get to see what those various bits do. And sure enough, exactly as you say, you think, okay, I'm going to load up the panniers because I'm going on a long trip. Select the option and make sure the bike is set up for it. So it's improving the riding experience, and it's also making it safer because the bike is properly set up for the weight load and the way you're riding it, the speed road and the conditions. So it can only be a way forward. If you don't like it, well, that's the way the bikes are going to go. There are still old bikes that, there's still old tech out there if you like it, but the modern bikes are all going to have it, and it's better for it.
And we're at the premium end of the motorcycle market here as well, aren't we? Particularly, adventure bikes, or take any bike. These are expensive machines, and customers or buyers expect the tech, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. It's the same with cars. There's exactly as you say. There's an expectation as what a bike should have at that level. If there was still a market for the basic bike. If you look how successful the T7 has been, and that is so low on tech. All you can do is turn the ABS on and off. That's it for tech.
You can play Tetris on the Speedo. That's it.
Absolutely. So there are those options out there, but in the premier classes, everybody's competing for a similar market, and hence consequently, it has to similar bells and whistles. And in a way, as I said, with KTM bringing their bike up to the spec of their younger siblings, they're also bringing it up to the spec of what's on the market. Because in 4 years, you think how many other bikes we've tested and what the tech is. They couldn't leave it any longer because the rest of the bikes have got it. And to a certain extent, that's why this KTM was not maybe as impressive as the other bikes, because although it's got all the tech there, it's really bringing it up to the level that it should be and what we've been riding for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
If you think that the 1260, we went on the 1260 launch 2 years ago, and it's already been a V4 version. Well, the 1260 had virtually all the stuff.
That's the Ducati,
had all the tech that the KTM has got now. So realistic, there's a touch of catch up in terms of this bike, bringing it up to the market, and that's why it's not quite as outstanding as you might think, because everything else has got it.
So if it came out 2 years ago, you probably, well, this is blowing my mind. Well, now it's it's to be expected on a premium adventure bike.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's there, but it kind of should be there.
Yeah. So we're talking about technology. We may as well go straight into the kind of cutting edge, or the newest piece of technology that we're seeing on the bike, which is the radar adaptive cruise control,
ACC,
adaptive cruise control,
adaptive cruise control, and basically, cruise control has been there on motorcycles for quite some time, and on long trips, if you've used it, it's great. You just press a little button, set the speed up, and on long motorway journeys, absolutely fine. But the adaptive bit has been coming to the car market for quite some time, and basically, it's keeping an eye on the traffic in front, and if the traffic in front starts slowing, it brings your speed down, and if that speeds up again, it takes it back up again. Now, in your mind, it's quite a shift to trust that technology.
Sounds like witchcraft. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, you can set the distance. You can set how close you want to be in front from the vehicles in front of you, and basically it will adjust that distance. It does so by initially reducing the acceleration, so taking the power away if you're getting too close. But if you're still getting too close, it will gently apply the brakes. So it really is witchcraft, but the brakes are being put on without you doing it. And that's really quite strange. It doesn't feel quite as odd, the slowing down, as the acceleration, getting it back up to there, because that's what felt odd for me, because the car in front moves on a little bit and all of a sudden the bike's accelerating without you doing anything. So we on the A roads, it was quite, we were following the other bikes, and it will pick up a bike in front. So if you're riding with your mates, it'll keep you at a distance to your mates, and that was kind of okay. We went onto the motorway, and so on the A road going down to Oxford, and there seemed to be an awful lot going on, and it was picking up on the car in front of it. It just felt a little bit. I need a quiet motorway with not much traffic on in order to get the feel of this technology. I know it's going to be good. It will just take a while to get there. The other thing it gets also is called overtake assist, and this, witchcraft plus, because if you're following a vehicle and it's monitoring the car in front, if you put the indicators on, it anticipates you're going to be overtaking, and it will slowly increase the speed until you move out, and then with nothing in front, it will take you back up to the speed you wanted to be.
I thought you were going to say it was going to steer for you there. That would be just a step too far for me.
It starts to slowly sort of speed up, and then you move to the side, clear road in front, it takes you up to your selected speed. Oh, wow. So it's a lot to take on board, and it is, there's that touch of a disconnect when you're initially using it, in the same way that if you forget that ordinary cruise control is on and you've got to hit the brakes to get it to slow down. So it's new tech that takes a while to adjust. In terms of adjusting speed up and down, that's, as I mentioned, there's two little buttons controlled on your hand left, on the thumb and forefinger. So it's completely separate to the main controls, and the main how to switch on is on the top of the switchgear. So I can really appreciate that it's going to be a thing to come onto lots of bikes. It's the second one this year. We've tested on it. I'm just aware, compared to conventional cruise control, which many people might not have used, it's a level above again. It'll take a while to be entirely comfortable. But I don't think we should be frightened. It generally is not witchcraft. It's just tech. It's the fact that it's controlling your throttle and your brakes that initially just feels all kinds of wrong. So
talking of slowing down, what are the brakes like on the new bike?
Well, the brakes and the wheels are one of the main things, and that hasn't changed from the previous model. And I guess that's on, as we probably mentioned before, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, the brakes were always good on the bike, and if you've got that much power, you do need big brakes. So there's big old 4-pot radial calipers, Brembos on the front, big disc and a twin pot on the back, and plenty of stopping power. When you combine that on with the ABS and the cornering ABS, cornering ABS was something that KTM developed on that first 1190 back in 2013, 2014. So it's been on that bike maybe longer than others. So the brakes are absolutely spot on. You can be absolutely leathering that down the A roads at legal speeds, obviously, and then you come to the roundabout, and all of a sudden you've got to stop because the car's coming. You didn't necessarily see it. It will haul up in that time, and there's no panic. It's not going to stop. It is really like chucking an anchor out the back, and it's going to slow you down. So really impressive brakes, but not just anchor like brakes. There, there's good feeling and whatever. I use the rear brake a fair bit on cornering just to sort of hold that line, and it's good at the lightweight stuff, but good that the front brakes will really get you out of trouble if you need to. So no complaints whatsoever in that department. And
the fork, am I right in thinking there's about 200 millimetres of suspension travel? Was there any fork dive evident particularly?
No, didn't get to the situation where it totally dived there. 200 back and front. It's WP Apex units back and front because of the semi-active. If you were going to get to a situation when you were going to bottom that, of course, the semi-active suspension would already have spotted that and would have stiffened it up. So there is a situation. So an interesting one that you can have as an option put onto the bike, which is anti-dive. Now that's particularly handy for if you take passengers a lot, because quite often passenger on the back isn't really concentrating what's going on. Why should they? They're not having to drive the thing. And it's quite easy. And some passengers are obviously worse than others of headbutting you every
I've
time.
had that a few times.
Every time you brake, and it might be only a small thing, but man, does it irritate. Well, what you can do, there's an anti-dive option on there which will stop the front pitching down as much. You still have the same braking effect, but effectively what it's doing is as you start to apply the brakes, it knows you're doing it and stiffens up the front. So it'll stop that diving down. So anti-dive technology has been there, for a long time. But this is intelligent anti-dive that picks up what you're doing and will stop that. So that can stop those arguments with your significant other on the back. So that's a good thing. You can also again as an option, there's an option for you adjusting the preload. On the front forks or on your toggle switch. The preload on the back comes as standard, but adjusting the preload on the front is an option you can have within there. And again, going to screen, a little picture of the forks comes up, and you rack up the preload. So again, if you prefer a stiffer front end, then you can actually you can actually sort that out. This joke is a copyright of the Carry On organisation. Make sure nurse the screens.
So going from stiff front ends to, I know you wanted to say something or try and make radiators sound interesting, because it's actually quite an important aspect of the new bike, isn't it?
It's an interesting thing. There's a host of work being done within the engine, from changing oil ways and making the clutch better or changing the gear change. But significant changes slightly outside the engine. In fact, they've gone from having one central radiator to having two split radiators. Now, that means the airflow actually goes onto the front cylinder, which is obviously good, and can flow through each radiator out the side of the bike, so the heat doesn't go onto the bikes. Also, what they've done is that each individual radiator serves a different cylinder. So the left does the one with the front cylinder, the right does the back. I'm not sure which way round it is, but either way, a radiator is serving an individual cylinder of the V there. It does make a difference in terms of the cooling. Now, if you are one of the people that bought the original 1190, you will recall that there was quite a problem, very quickly evident, that the back cylinder on the 1190 absolutely fried your knee. You could go out at the start of a ride, strap a burger onto your knee, and it will be done by the time you got to the roundabout. In fact, there was a subsequent an upgrade to put a heat shield onto that to make sure that didn't happen with that. So with the rear cylinder on V-twins, there's often a problem with heating. And the 1290 always had a bit of that, but the new radiator arrangement increases the flow through and really makes a difference. I didn't notice any heat whatsoever on either knee with that, so it's quite significant. If you actually look at the bike, you can see the rear cylinder is quite exposed. It almost looks like an off-road Husaberg. It's so exposed at the back there, but it's getting the heat away from that back cylinder. So. Well, it's maybe a geeky detail, but actually, if you're riding it for a long time, and if you're commuting on the bike, then you really don't want it to be getting hot. In fact, the Ducati V4 actually turns off the back cylinders in traffic to stop that build-up of heat. So it's an established thing with V twins, getting rid of the temperature on those bikes. So that they've addressed it by a radiator either side of it, without it looking. You wouldn't particularly notice it, then you see the front. I can actually see the exhaust ports. I can see the front cylinder, when normally there would have been a radiator in front of it.
Yeah, I guess historically KTM's, going back a few years, had a bit of a reputation for being pretty warm. Between your legs, didn't they? But it's good to see it.
That's just the nature of having that that rear cylinder tucked away and getting no airflow for it. So any V is going to have it, and once you enclose it in bodywork, inevitably that's going to be there. So they've realised that, and on this one they've been able to address it in a completely different way, not just upping the flow and upping the amount of fans, by saying that actually what we'll do. Different radiator arrangement, flow and airflow through the machine and out the radiators either side. So it might be only a small change, but say you'd notice it if you're riding it in hot conditions, and say if you're adventure riding at some time, you're going to be riding through towns and traffic. Yep. Keeping it cool is going to be important. So it's a good change for them to have made.
Yeah, and something else I think KTM's are probably relatively well known for is firm seats, or seats that are on the firm side. Now, yeah. I'm going to throw it out here. I actually find KTM seats, once I've got used to them, some of the comfiest I've ever used. The seat on the 790 Adventure, I could ride all day after a few hundred miles of breaking it in, and have no bum ache at all, which is almost unheard of for me. So 1290 at Super Adventure S.
Yeah.
What's it like?
I mean, you could never, exactly as you say, you could never accuse KTM of making particularly comfy seats. I ride their off-road bikes a lot, and I've just upgraded that one. And it's very much like a plank on the off-road bikes, like a plank with a black cover on it.
Yeah.
But again, it is that thing. They are necessarily firm, and it stops you sinking into it, and allows you to move more if you don't sink into it. So there is always that sort of a bit of a compromise between, if it's too soft, you won't be able to move around. So they've worked a lot on this seat, and it is comfortable. I rode it for 200 miles, had no problem. You've ridden 200 miles at the end of the day, but that's the same with any seat. But they are aware that there are going to be people who don't necessarily like that, or want a higher seat, or want a lower seat. And we were quite astounded that they revealed that they didn't tell us all but there are 11 seating options.
11. Well,
11.
that's
that's on top
colours
of
and trims.
who knows? But that's on top of the fact that the seat on it is adjustable for 2 positions anyway.
Okay.
So I guess that effectively means between the 11 seats and the 2 positions, there's 22 seating options available on the KTM. What is nice between it is that the passenger seat and the rider's seat are split. So that's good. It stops any roll through, and the passenger seat is fairly flat. Nice and wide, good grab handles on there, and also the pillion pegs are not too high. They're at decent height, so you don't end up sat like a jockey at the back. And again, referring back to that RC8 back at the time, if you ever get a chance to see where the pillion pegs are on an RC8. Wow,
that's going to have a happy partner.
I mean, they'd have fallen off the back by that time anyway. The first time you accelerated, but in terms of being a pillion on the 1290, they've thought about it. Nice flat open seat, and the rider's seat plenty comfortable enough for me. If you've come from something with the equivalent of a lazy boy seat on there, you might have a few hours of adjustment to what KTM put on there, but. If you're going to be riding it all day, it doesn't need to be like a sofa. It needs to offer support to make sure you're not going to start sinking back in it. So it is that compromise, and I think they've got it right.
Yeah, and talking of riding all day, am I right in thinking it's a 20-litre fuel tank?
23 litres.
23 litres.
23 litres.
So what sort of range do you reckon we'd get from that?
I didn't have the actual figures on there, and to be honest, it's strange when we talk about range. It's as if you're going to ride bikes for massive distance without stopping. If you are going motorcycle touring, you are going to stop every 200 miles anyway, just because the fact it's a good idea to stretch your legs, have a cup of coffee and stuff like that. So once you get beyond 200, there might be people who want to go 300 miles without having to stop. I don't think necessarily it's possibly the smartest way to ride. But I mean, 23 litres. It's hard to say the exact range, because if you're heavy on the throttle, if you keep it in sport mode and are really aggressive all the time, you'll get through it much quicker than if you're riding in street mode and are just taking it relatively easy. But 23, it fits with what's there on the market. If you start going to the big 30 litre tanks, it's the weight that is involved with that. Every litre is weighing a kilo. Do you want 30 kilos of fuel on that one? It would be better distributed on the KTM than in others, but it is that weight load and moving it around. Because don't forget, if you've got 30 litres of fuel because you're going big distances, the likelihood are you've got a passenger on the back, you've got a top box, and you've got those panniers. How heavy is that bike going to be? So there is that balance between it. You've got a good balance of decent range, but not excessive weight from your fuel load. And I think you'd be happy in the distance you can cover on the KTM. We'll put the actual figures into the review, but I'm not going to make them up. But there'll be plenty in 23
So 260 miles per tank. Okay, then. Julian says no. That's good. So when we review a bike for Adventure Bike Rider magazine, and when Julian writes the full review of the Super Adventure S, which will appear in the May-June issue of ABR, we always give the ABR verdict.
Yep.
So I thought now we could give it a mini ABR verdict. Yeah. So just quick response answers. As a
You're saying don't waffle at this point, aren't you?
Waffle as much as you want.
You've read my work.
As a commuter, would you, is this a bike you'd commute on?
I don't think I'd particularly want to commute on it. I think there'd be very little joy on any of the big adventure bikes of using a commuter. If you only have one bike and you needed to go commuting, absolutely fine. It'll do it. But this is a bike of 160 bhp. Do you want to be tootling around town in it? I'd be more tempted to get something a little bit more suited to the job if budget allowed. And to be honest, if you're buying that bike, budget probably is going to allow that. There are better bikes to commute on than bigger adventure bikes. Yeah. It'll do it if you have to. Probably stick it in rain mode because that'll take it down to 100 bhp and make it a lot better for tootling through the traffic. But they're physically quite big. Then you had the mirrors on top and the wide bars. It's not ideal, but it depends what your commute is. If your commute is 60 miles on A roads, fill your boots.
Yeah.
If you need to go into central London, not so sure.
Not so much. I just love the fact that it's pulling the power down to 100 brake horsepower. It boggles me because that's still an awful lot of power. But there you go. So as a commuter, not ideal, but if it's your only bike, it'll do the job. Yep. As a weekend tourer,
lovely. It's what it's there, what it's kind of there for, and a lot of the way that a lot of people will use them to do the weekend tour. You'd want to make it into a long weekend, wouldn't you? Go out on the Friday and come back on the Monday. But yes, absolutely, really great on the A roads, very comfortable on the motorways. But a combination of the two would be absolutely fine. Yeah, fill your boots with that one as well.
Yeah, as a continental road tourer.
Yep, absolutely. It's where the sport versions or the more road going versions of adventure bikes are really sort of in their own territory.
Yeah.
It is begging to be loaded up with luggage, and when eventually we can, disappearing over to France and just driving as long as you can, and stopping overnight where you can. Absolutely. Continental tour, that's what you
I assume this bike for. How much luggage, how small or large your pillion or you are, you're not going to run out of power on that thing, are you?
Absolutely not. No. And if you are, you're a bit of a hero. You probably do be racing professionally, I think.
Okay. As an adventure bike, as an off-roader.
Off-roader, well, it certainly do it, and it comes the base of the bike is an off-road adventure bike. So yes, it'll certainly do it. It is just more slanted to. This is the road-going version that really should do if you want to do those big continental tours and that sort of thing. If you want to make it into more an off-road version, then put the wire wheels on, get some dual sport tyres on, and see how well it works for that. But say, when there's the option of the R version, I think it would seem a little bit contrary to buy a bike that is good at one thing and then want it to be better at another. Yeah. I would much prefer to buy the R and then use the R on the road if a lot of my riding was off road.
What would the 1290 Super Adventure S be like as a around the world overlander, do you think?
Well, I mean, there are people doing it. KTM, I met a girl on the 890 test, or a young woman on the 890 test who is doing just that on her own 1290. So they inevitably they are capable of doing it. People will say, and I think probably it's a right concern, as the bikes get more technical, then the idea of taking those bikes with lots of technology and lots of reliance on the technology into out of the boat places. Again, it's that leap of faith to actually do that when you've got semi-active suspension, when you've got all those rider modes, and you've got everything relying on battery power and electronics, and you run into difficulties in the middle of nowhere. They are harder to fix and harder to get round than the more conventional bikes. If you see people who regularly ride around the world, they usually do it on quite simple bikes. Okay, so. It's a difficult one because there are people doing it, and perhaps they've got more skills than you and I. But equally so, I'd probably want to be going around the world, knowing that the terrain will vary between tarmac and off road and unmade surfaces. Again, you might think in terms of going around the world, the R version might be wiser to do it to cope with those variations. Because if it's all tarmac, then fine. But the world is not all tarmac. So again, the 1290 would do it. I think probably the 1290S would do it. I think probably the 1290R would be a better choice if that's what you're trying to go around the world. But prove me wrong. There'll be somebody
get you around there quickly. Anyway.
Oh yes,
if that's your thing.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And finally, as a pillion carrier.
Yep, absolutely. So it's got all the skills we need for that pillion. It's nice and comfortable. You can be gentle in terms of the power. You can change the suspension to adjust the fact so it's properly set up in terms of preload, and you can make it nice and comfortable and not a harsh ride. So yeah, absolutely. If two-up riding is a thing you do regularly, the 1290 is up for the task and will make your pillion happy. They won't be unhappy with what doing. And with the additional anti-dive system, you won't have those arguments. Will you stop doing that with your helmet? Okay.
Nice. So I'm just trying to think if I've forgotten one of the ABR verdict categories, but I think I've gone through them all.
No, I think you're there.
No, that's pretty good. I'm quite impressed with myself, actually. Yeah. So I think we've delved pretty deep into the bike. At the beginning of this review, I asked you thumbs up, thumbs down, mediocre. You gave us a thumbs up.
Yeah.
And I think when I buy a bike, I'll look at all the stats and the specs and things like that, but I tend to buy a bike with my heart. I buy a bike because of what it makes me feel. Yeah. So how does the KTM Super Adventure S make you feel?
Well, that's a curious one, because again, the 1290 is a bit like the 890, that when you're sat on the bike, it absolutely all makes sense.
Yeah.
It is, when you're sat on the bike, that the heart takes over, and it's good, it's great at what it does, it handles well and whatever. You step back from it, and it's not a buy with your heart bike, like in a way that other bikes are, because let's face it, the whole of the off-road range from the 1190 onwards, you'd be hard pushed to call them beautiful. They are not beautiful
distinctive
bikes.
Looks, isn't it?
Yeah, it is distinctive, and they are very Marmite for people. So, if we post pictures, we know there will be people saying it looks great, but an awful lot of people saying, wow, don't like that, it's ugly, and those things. And, what's ugly, what's pretty will vary between people. But they do have that thing that on the bike they make sense, off the bike they are not necessarily naturally beautiful bikes. And I can't pretend this is a beautiful bike in the way that the Multistrada V4 might be beautiful, or say the 8ATAS Africa Twin. It's not necessarily in that category. And it's a strange design thing with KTMs, because if you look at their off-road bikes, my EXC, that looks like every other bike, and I do think it's a beautiful looking bike. I don't necessarily think beautiful is an adjective I'd use for the 1290. So it's a head bike much more than a heart bike. And also, if you like the big power of that V twin, that might be the thing that gets your heart, because KTM do it better than anything else that's out there, out there on the market. So it's a particular type of rider that goes for the KTM, and they absolutely love it. Whether this one will persuade people who are already on a different track onto KTM, I'm not sure, because it is much more of the same thing from KTM. It's not a quantum shift into, wow, this is completely different. It's a continuation of what they were already doing, and a great improvement of where they were 4 years ago. It's brought it all up to spec, in line with with the competition and the other models. So it's exactly what it's intended to do. It's a great adventure bike.
Yeah. So brilliant to ride. Just you're not sold on the looks.
No. I'm sorry. I'd like to say. I'd like to say it was.
It's I always find KTM bike. They're striking. They're mean. I think they look kind of cool. But yeah, there's something about looking at them that it's slightly uncomfortable, isn't it? It's a strange one, because I've said my favourite bike of the last few years, that's 790 Adventure and Adventure R. I just adore riding that bike, but I don't spend a lot of time looking at it.
No, but it's also interesting that the road bikes seem to suit that angular graphics more so than the adventure bikes. If you look at the Beast, if you look at, say, the Dukes, they
look cool, don't they?
Duke 890 and the Duke 790. It suits that angularity just because of the nature of how they're built and put together. They all are all muscular up front and have that look. So hence that mean face looks good. It's just when you translate it across to the adventure bike, it's that praying mantis look, which is followed all the way through the from the 1190 range. It's their signature look. Many people like it, but equally so, many people think it's not a look that's for them.
And I'm grateful that a lot of people think beauty is very different, because
I'm saying,
and they think this is beautiful. Well, my wife does anyway. But no, that's great.
Not what she said to me.
No, is it not? No, but no. Thank Julian. Well, really appreciate you coming in, having a chat about the bike. I think it's a bike. I'm really curious to ride, which I think is always a good sign.
Yeah.
I think, it's a bike I'd love to just swing my leg over and disappear off for a few days. So if you'd like to read Julian's full review in the May-June issue of Adventure Bike Rider magazine, when he'll also be taking a look at the more off-road focus version of the 1290 Super Adventure, then you can pick that up from www.adventurebikerider.com/shop. But obviously not until May, because it's the May-June issue, so it won't be out until then. And if you do fancy styling yourselves a little like Julian and I in the studio today, you can get hold of an ABR t-shirt, and we've got a wide selection of them as well. Just head over again to www.adventurebikerider.com/shop, and you can show the world you're an ADV biker on and off the bike. Well, Julian, thanks very much. It's been fascinating. And until the next time, thanks for watching.
When do I get the R?
2 weeks' time, I think.
Fantastic.
2 weeks' time, yeah. But I'm having a ride of that one as well. Cheers.